For every cruising sailor, one of the most important purchases is an anchor, and likewise, one of your most important skills is anchoring. Selecting the best anchor for each type of bottom or for a shifting current is essential. In our next story, we're going to take a look at underwater footage of different anchors as they set, dig in, and hold.
Anchoring is something we all do pretty frequently. Unfortunately, most of the time the anchor disappears beneath the surface of the water and we don't really know what happens down below. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about the best procedures for anchoring. We'll examine some different anchors and see how they work, and we'll try and take a look at the bottom and see what happens when the anchor hits the bottom, how it digs in, and how it holds our boat in position. We're here today on Hyperion, a beautiful Tiana 37. When we decided to do this test, we went to the anchor manufacturers and asked what size anchor they would recommend for a heavy displacement cruising boat in the 35 to 40 foot range. We have 5 anchors here today that they recommended. The first is a Fortress. It's an FX23 model. Fortress anchors are made out of an aluminum alloy. It makes them very lightweight. This weighs in at only about 15 pounds. It's got performance equivalent to a much heavier anchor. The second is the Danforth H1800. It's a high tensile design, weighs in at about 35 pounds. The third is the Bruce, an anchor that was designed for use by the North Sea oil rigs. It has a unique design, looks like a big claw. It's a 33-pound anchor. We have a traditional CQR plow anchor. It's been around for a long time. This is a 35-pound model. From the same manufacturer, Simpson Lawrence, we also have a modernized version of the plow called a Delta, also a 35-pound anchor. We'll be dropping each anchor twice onto a sandy bottom and once or twice onto a grassy bottom as well. We'll try to follow exactly the same procedure each time so that we can compare the results. Now, this is only a small total number of drops, so we can't claim that our results are going to be statistically definitive in terms of anchor performance. But nevertheless, I think you'll get a very good idea of what happens down there on the bottom and how different anchors perform in different conditions. For our test today, we'll use this rod, which will attach to each of the anchors in turn. It's made up of about 8 feet of 5/16" chain connected to a 3/4 inch nylon rod. We normally might want to use more chain, but we're only working at about 10 feet of water today. Our rod is marked at the 25-foot, 35-foot, and 60-foot points. We'll lower the anchor quickly to the bottom. We'll veer out the line until we're at the 35-foot point. We'll hold it there until it starts to pick up a little tension and we know that we've straightened the line and the chain out. Then we'll veer to 60 feet, cleat it there, and set the anchor. In our tests, a diver drove a small stake at the spot where each anchor landed, then measured from that stake to the spot where the anchor finally dug in and set. Once the divers have done their checks, we'll then use the boat's engines to power off to the side and pull at about a 60-degree angle to the original direction that the anchor was set. This will show us how an anchor would perform if you had a 60-degree wind change during the night while you were at anchor. Well, let's get started and see how these anchors work. Okay, ready to go with the Bruce. Okay, lower it away. The Bruce, because of its weight, settled quickly to the bottom. And one thing we learned is how frequently an anchor lands on its back. We let the wind take us back, bringing the rod taut, digging the anchor into the sand. Next, we gave our engine 2/3 throttle for a full 30 seconds to fully set the anchor. On both drops, the Bruce dug in and set within 2.5 feet from where it landed. It didn't penetrate far, but it held very well. Still, it was an eye-opener to realize that just a small portion of one fluke was all that was holding our expensive yacht. Our next test was to simulate a wind shift. On the Bruce, the pull of the wind shift was in the same direction the anchor was set, and it just rotated slightly, then held firmly. The Fortress, because it weighs only 15 pounds, seemed to float toward the bottom, but it was amazing to watch it set. When a load came on the anchor rod causing the shank to rise, the design of the anchor forced the flukes to drive into the bottom, penetrating deep into the sand and holding very well. On the veer test, the anchor pivoted only a few degrees, as our diver indicates. Our next anchor, the CQR plow, settled on its back and then had the chain foul the flukes. This caused it to drag over 30 feet. Finally, it flipped over and dug in one fluke slightly. On our next drop, the CQR landed on its side and dragged for 6 feet until it dug in and held very well. We did notice that on both the drops, the CQR only dug in with one fluke. On the veer test, the CQR, like all the anchors, reset very quickly in less than 1 foot. After each drop, our divers recorded the results. The newly designed Delta plow landed correctly, but it was then flipped over onto its back. Nevertheless, it rolled into the correct position and dug in quickly and solidly. It was dug in so well that it barely moved 2 inches during the veer test. As I went to lift the anchor, it was obvious that it was dug in very deeply. On the second drop, the Delta again flipped itself over, but then it penetrated well and set in just over 7 feet. As you can see on both drops, the Delta buried its flukes deeply. Of all the anchors, this penetrated by far the best and gave the greatest feeling of confidence. We concluded that the Fortress and the Delta were the clear winners when it came to penetration, while the distance to set results looked like this. After testing in the sand, we motored over to a grassy bottom to see how our anchors would perform there. The first thing we learned was that you shouldn't anchor in the grass. Watch as anchor after anchor drags through the grass. The only 2 anchors that seemed to penetrate even a bit were the Fortress and the Delta. But watch how the Delta can fool you. It appears to be set, but then it pops out, taking a lot of grass with it. I hope our tests have given you a much better understanding of what happens to your anchor when it's down there on the bottom and how it works to hold your boat in position. We've seen that most of the anchors do perform much better in a sandy bottom than they do in a grassy area, which is one reason to avoid the grassy bottom. Of course, we also ought to stay away from the grassy areas because biologically speaking, they're a very rich area and we don't want to disrupt it by tearing it up with an anchor. And of course, it's even more important to stay away from coral reefs because the anchor will do grievous damage to a coral reef, and it takes years for a coral reef to recover from that damage. So we really need to stay away from the reefs. While we haven't been able to attest all kinds of anchors in all the potential kinds of anchoring situations, it seems clear that a couple of these anchors have performed extremely well. I think that we could probably pick 2 of the newer anchors, the Fortress and the Delta, and say that they would be an excellent combination that would give you good, secure anchoring in a wide range of conditions. There are, of course, many other aspects involved with anchoring, many things we haven't been able to consider here today, and we look forward to addressing those in a future issue. We look forward to seeing you then.